I want to take you back to the 1930s, specifically to Europe and Vienna to be exact. And in Vienna, there was a man. This man had everything. This man had a beautiful wife, a flourishing profession as a neurologist and a psychiatrist. He had a large extended family, a community rooted, right, over generations. Just a wonderful life. And then, as his life was ascending into those 30s, another power was ascending as well that would essentially send him down a very different path. And that was the rise of Hitler and the Nazis who came to power in the 30s. You know, a lot of people think the Holocaust just happened. It didn't just happen. It happened slowly over time. And as they rose in power, they started to reduce the people of Europe, especially the Jews of Europe, reduce them slowly and methodically. And this one man's life was reduced. His freedom to move about his neighborhood was taken away. He, like so many Jews, were put into ghettos where they were forced to live, having left behind their house, left behind so many of their possessions. He was forced to leave behind most of his profession, still given bits and pieces of it, but slowly reduced, no longer allowed to practice as a psychiatrist, certainly not in any way he wanted to. Now he's reduced to one little sliver of serving the Jewish market, and eventually that was taken away. And then, worst of all, not only his civil liberties were taken away, like millions of others, but his wife was murdered. His unborn child was murdered. His parents were murdered. His brother was murdered. His extended family, his friends, his community, murdered. Some of them in front of his eyes. He was then taken away and incarcerated in not one but 4 different concentration camps, not the least of which was Auschwitz, where he spent 4 years having everything taken from him. As he said, even every last hair on his body, as it was all shaven and he was stripped down, and all he had was, in his words, his naked existence. And then they took from him the last thing you can take from a person, their name, their identity. He was no longer the name that he once was called. Now he was prisoner 119104. 119104 was no longer a human being. He was no longer a man. He was reduced, like millions of others, to nothing but a number. And what can you do with numbers? You can erase numbers. You can extinguish numbers. You can burn them to ashes and send them up through crematoria across Europe. And that's what he was, and that's what so many were. However, even though they took everything from this man, as he said later on, they couldn't take one thing that was his and his alone, that no man or woman or circumstance can ever take from us unless we give it up, unless we acquiesce, unless we sacrifice and become a victim. But he wouldn't do that. And he was never a victim. In his words, he was in prison, but he was never imprisoned. He was incarcerated, but he was always internally free. Why? Because he had what he called the defiant power of the human spirit. That spirit that was within him, it's within you, it's within every one of us. And we need to turn to that defiant power of spirit when we are going through difficult, trying circumstances, when the world around us is trying to reduce us in a myriad of ways. External forces out in society, in our families, in our communities, and in ourselves. So much reductionism, as he called it, reducing others, reducing the world around us, reducing ourselves to nothing but a number, but a victim, but prisoner 119104. But he was never that, because he knew his name. He knew his essence, his spirit. He knew who he was, and because of that, he was free. And his name was Viktor Frankl. I share this with you. I've shared with you 100 videos of this man as my teacher and mentor for this particular reason. I love his philosophy. I love his teachings as a logotherapist. I'm a logotherapist. He created logotherapy, meaning-centered, healing, living. It's more than meaning. It's meaning. It's purpose. It's resilience. It's truth. When you have that, when you have the defiant spirit at the center of your life, and you know what it is, and you can articulate it and you can live it, you have everything you need to defy the circumstances of life and whatever it brings you. And you will be victimized, but you don't have to remain a victim. You can rise up and be free. And I share this with you now more than ever before, because as I look out my window, it seems like in many ways the world is on fire. At Columbia University and UCLA and dozens, if not hundreds, of college campuses around this country, America, there's fires going on. It's not pro-Palestinian protests or support rallies anymore. Now it's pro-Hamas. Now it's anti-Jew. It's not anti-Israel, it's anti-Jew. It's Jews go back to Europe. Hitler should have finished what he started, right? That we have the protesters a final solution, and it's to get rid of the Jews. And if you don't see that, that's willful blindness, because we choose not to see that. But it is no longer about, and I would argue it never was about Palestinians, it's about hatred. It's about nihilism, as Viktor Frankl called it, of destruction of humanity, destruction of existence because of meaninglessness at the center of these agitators, these activists and these terrorist lives. But it's not just on college campuses. All throughout the world right now, we have nihilistic fights, right? Meaninglessness fights that are just burning hot. Everywhere you go, you hear about nihilism. You hear about the meaninglessness and the hopelessness. You listen to the Gen X who are having less sex, who are getting married less, who are having less children, who are, you name it, across the board. There's a hopelessness. There's a despair around the environment and around pandemics and around the economy, and you fill in the blank. And I turn to the words of Paul Harvey, those of you who remember him, who said, in times like these, all I can tell you, there have always been times like these. There have always been times like these and worse. What the Great Depression and our grandparents and great-grandparents went through was worse than these economic times. And what the Jews went through with the Holocaust was certainly worse than what's going on in college campuses or what's going on towards Israel right now. And what good people everywhere are going through right now is infinitely better than what the greatest generation went through. Most of them having to face the thought of going off to war, many of them going off to the war, many of them not coming back. In times like these, there have always been times like these and worse. And that's why I turn to Viktor Frankl. This was a man who not only preached the message of logotherapy, of living with meaning and purpose, or as he said, he who has a why to live for can endure any how. Reparaphrasing Nietzsche. If you have your why, you can endure your how. This was a man who had his why and endured the hows of hell, of the horrors, of the Holocaust. And if you have your why, you can endure your how. And I trust men and women who have gone through the hell and horrors of life and have not only come out of the other side surviving, but like Viktor Frankl, thriving. Or as he says, transforming tragedy into triumph. That is what every human being can do if we get past our nihilism, if we get past the meaninglessness that we perceive out in the world, and we realize that it's only meaningless if we don't have something inside of us, if we don't have our defiant power of human spirit, if we don't know, articulate, and stand guard of our why. Our why is our purpose. Our why is our meaning. It's yours and yours alone. I can't tell you what it is, but it's in there. And it is incumbent upon you when the fires are raging and when the world feels upside down to not only discover it, but to articulate it and to live it each and every day. I have my why. It's 3 paragraphs I say 3 times a day. It's mine. It articulates who I am and why I'm here and what I'm supposed to do. And it's not a cliche. With all due respect to Simon Sinek and his great book, Start With Why, that can feel sometimes a little easy, a little shallow, like a mission statement, right? Starbucks mission statement, Google's mission statement. This is my mission statement, but it has been earned through the hells of my own living and my inner concentration camps, as Viktor Frankl would call it, and the scars and the wounds and the losses that I have, and you're no different than me. And when we go back through and we sift through those scars and we find our spark our sparks of meaning, as the Kabbalists call them. And we start gathering those together. We start gathering together our why. And then we formulate that into our mission. That's our flame. And then we start living it and turn it into a fire. And then, as I say, we carry the fire forward, illuminating the darkness. No matter how dark it is, we can see, because we have the power of our why. And that's why I preach the work of Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning Logotherapy. That's why I teach this work. That's why I live it. That's why I apply it in my own life. I utilize it in guiding clients. I utilize it in going into organizations. I utilize it in a world that needs a why now more than ever before, because he or she who has a why can endure anyhow. Right now, across university campuses in the Middle East, in every area of life, economically and politically and socially, and all the upheaval, we don't have a who problem and a what problem and a where problem and a when problem and a how problem. Yes, those are problems, and we will deal with them. But right now, as I can see it, we have a why problem, individually and collectively. We don't know our why, we don't live our why, and without a why, we can't endure any of those what, wheres, whens, and hows. It's time to get back to these foundational principles. It's time for this great man and this great message to go out into the world. It's a message that's time has come. Reach out to me. I'm happy to talk to you about it. Buy Viktor Frankl's seminal work, Man's Search for Meaning. He's got 39 other books. Come over to my website, defiantspirit.org, where you can get 100 or hundreds at this point of Viktor Frankl's teachings, and then indirect teachings. I've turned them into tools. I have practical tools. I got like 100 tools. Check it out over on my YouTube channel. They're there for you free. All of this is for you so that you can discover your why and live your why and leave your why as a legacy, so that this generation will finally rise up and become the next greatest generation. And it will only happen when we discover and live our why. See you in the next video.